Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're doing something a bit different, taking a respectful, virtual walking tour through the quiet, peaceful cemeteries of Springville and Mapleton, Utah. On the surface, sure, these serene grounds are resting places. But if you look just a little bit closer, they're actually this incredible archive of local history and veteran legacy. We're going to uncover the stories of the men who literally built, defended, and shaped this community.
It's a question we really should all ask ourselves when we walk through historic grounds like these. What profound stories of courage and community do these quiet headstones tell? We need to look past the carved stone markers and consider the deep history and the incredibly diverse forms of service that built Utah Valley. These aren't just names and dates, These are the foundational pillars of a community, representing generations upon generations of sacrifice.
Section 1. Pioneers and Early Defenders. Building a Foundation.
Okay, let's dive right into this by traveling back to the rugged 1800s. The pioneer era was a time of just immense hardship. It required a tentative, day-by-day struggle just to survive and establish a foothold in a pretty unforgiving landscape. Take Levi Newell Kendall, for example. Historical records suggest he arrived in the Salt Lake Valley way back in July 1847 with the advance companies of Mormon pioneers. His grave marker honors his service in the Utah militia during the Indian Wars. Records indicate he actually participated in the Echo Canyon campaigns during the 10th Utah War of 1857. And that required long, tough periods away from home, defending these early settlements under highly uncertain frontier conditions. He eventually became one of the very first settlers of Mapleton in the 1880s, reportedly building a log cabin that stood for over a century.
Then we have Richard Byrd. He arrived in Springville on October 1st, 1850. Now, Richard had already survived intense religious persecution and expulsion in Missouri and Illinois before even crossing the plains. Once in Utah, he helped construct the original Pioneer Fort in Springville for protection. He was a true community builder, plowing some of the first farmland, serving as a constable, and building early irrigation systems. During the federal tensions in 1859, it's reported that he and other civic leaders literally had to hide out in the nearby canyons to avoid arrest until the crisis finally subsided.
But his courage wasn't just in avoiding conflict, it was in facing nature head-on. During a grueling colonization mission to the Muddy River in Nevada, accounts vividly recall a terrifying moment when another settler's wagon became trapped in quicksand in the Virgin River. Without any hesitation, Richard leaped into the chest-deep water and successfully drove the panicked team forward, saving the wagon and the family inside. It's a powerful micro-narrative of a man who literally put his life on the line for his neighbors.
Section 2. Protecting the Home Front. The 1897 Bank Robbery.
As the community grew, obviously the nature of its defense changed too. We transition now from the wilderness frontier to the literal defense of town streets. Enter Joseph William Allen. He was a simple, hardworking blacksmith who was suddenly drawn into a highly dangerous local crisis. In 1897, the Springville Bank was robbed, and the thieves fled into Hobble Creek Canyon. What happened next is a pretty amazing testament to the era's civic duty. First, local citizens, including our blacksmith Joseph, reportedly formed posses to pursue the bandits. Second, surviving accounts suggest a violent, intense exchange of gunfire in the canyon. And third, despite the extreme danger, the posse actually succeeded in cornering the criminals in the thick brush.
But that victory came at a massive personal cost. During that shootout, Joseph Allen was shot in the leg. The wound was so devastating that his leg eventually had to be amputated, and he lived the remainder of his life wearing a wooden leg. Let's just pause respectfully on that thought for a second. He wasn't a soldier or a lawman by trade, right? He was a blacksmith, yet his civilian community spirit required immense, permanent personal sacrifice to keep his town safe.
And this brilliantly illustrates a massive shift in how the citizens of Springville and Mapleton served. We move from the frontier defense of the Utah militia and local posses to the staggering scope of global deployment during the 20th century. We're talking about the 9th Air Force and the Pacific Fleet. The defense of the community expanded to the defense of the entire free world.
Section 3. Heroes of World War II, the Global Stage.
This brings us to the climax of our historical narrative, where young men from this small, quiet Utah community were called away to face extraordinary, unimaginable danger on a global stage. Now, what's really interesting is that number right there, 25. Lieutenant Donald L. Byrd of Mapleton served in the Army Air Corps.
He completed 25 combat missions over occupied Europe with the 9th Air Force. Now, during World War II, completing 25 missions was an absolutely extraordinary milestone because flying those missions was incredibly dangerous. Air crews faced severe weather, mechanical failures, anti-aircraft fire, and enemy fighters constantly. A lot of crews simply did not survive a full combat tour.
Because of his actions, Lieutenant Byrd was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation praises him and his fellow airmen, noting that despite adverse weather and skillfully devised enemy defenses, quote, these men displayed marked ability and unswerving devotion to duty, which reflect credit upon themselves. It is a tremendous, lasting recognition of a young airman's courage under fire, so far from the safety of Mapleton.
But man, this global conflict carried such a heavy emotional weight. George Leland Clement, another local veteran, answered the call to serve in the Navy. After hearing the news of the attack on Pearl Harbor, he wrote a deeply human, totally private journal entry. He wrote, "This changed the course of my life, in some ways better, and then again not so good." When he boarded the train in Spanish Fork for military induction, he wondered if he would ever see his wife and children again. It really just shows the incredible emotional burden of leaving a family behind.
Now, George was known as a gentle, quiet man, famous for his kindness. Yet he faced extreme horrors in the Pacific Theater. On July 19, 1945, he was wounded during combat operations on Luzon in the Philippines, for which he was awarded the Purple Heart. The stark contrast between his quiet demeanor back home and the extreme, violent sacrifice he made overseas is truly profound.
Section 4. Modern Eras of Service. A Lifelong Commitment. As we move past World War II, we see how the whole concept of duty kind of kept evolving. In the modern era, service became a lifelong commitment, seamlessly blending both military and civilian life to sustain the community. Let's trace the remarkable timeline of Bruce A. Black. His life is basically a masterclass in ongoing dedication. He joined the Naval Reserve in 1953. In 1955, he served in the Army in South Korea following the armistice. By 1960, he began a long career in Utah law enforcement, eventually retiring in 1998 with the Utah Highway Patrol. And, simultaneously, the whole time, he continued his Naval Reserve service, rising through naval intelligence to eventually achieve the rank of Rear Admiral.
But you know what? Perhaps the most astounding number associated with Rear Admiral Bruce A. Black isn't a military rank or the years he spent on the police force. It's the number 14. He was the father of 14 children. These veterans were not just soldiers and officers, they were devoted family men, scout leaders, and community mentors. Bruce even received the Silver Beaver Award for his distinguished volunteer service to youth.
And when you look at Bruce A. Black's grave marker, despite a highly decorated military and law enforcement career spanning decades, the text emphasizes his family. Father of 14, married Kay Stewart. It beautifully encapsulates the true heart of his legacy. The uniform was simply what he wore to protect the thing that mattered most, his family and his community.
Section 5. A Lasting Community Tribute.
So the crucial point is really this. When we walk through the Springville and Mapleton cemeteries, we aren't just looking at history. We are looking at the blueprint of how a community is built and sustained. We've seen the full spectrum today, haven't we? The pioneer survival and settling by men like Levi Kendall and Richard Byrd, the literal defense of the home front by Joseph Allen, the extraordinary global sacrifice of Lieutenant Donald Byrd and George Clement, and the lifelong civic mentorship of Bruce A. Black. These markers are lasting testaments to the quiet, steadfast dedication that protects and nurtures our society. Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought to reflect on today. Knowing the incredible, sometimes devastating sacrifices made by the men in these cemeteries just to build and defend the towns we live in, how will your daily actions build and protect your community for the next generation? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope it changes the way you look at the quiet history right in your own backyard.